Well, thank you, Nicole. I'm flattered to hear about my incredible deeds. On natural and cultural resources, I want to introduce the ecosign concept of sustainable design to you. And what you see here is nothing that we have designed at Ecosign Academy. It's a bit older. This is the Nebra sky disk. It's about approximately 4,000 years old. And what you see here is a very early example for the transformation of natural resources into culture. It is made, I think, well, it's a metal. I don't know the details, but it's a metal. And what you see here is the image of the cosmos as it was experienced 4,000 years ago. So it tries to put the experience of nature with its varieties into a concept, a symbolic concept, and over the centuries it has been worked over and transformed into different meanings. This just as a little hint. I will come back to it a bit later. Now let's have a look at my plan, what I would like to show you. Now I think this is the point where I'm pressing too often on the button. I was warned not to do it. What we do at Ecosign, a short introduction, an extremely short history of design, because I could talk much longer about it. I will shortly explain you what we understand as sustainable design, what the cultural dimension of sustainable design is, and then my favorite point, arts and aesthetics, because I believe that the art history as a precedent for design, and that has some consequences for sustainable design as we do it nowadays, and then some short remarks on Bildung, which is the German word of education for sustainable design, but the German word Bildung contains much more than the English translation can transmit. So, what is Ecosign Academy? We are a cozy little academy in Cologne. We have been founded in 1994 by Karin Simone Fuß. She founded it after a frustrating university career where she experienced that in her design studies ecology wasn't mentioned at all. So already as a student she decided to found her own design academy where ecology is in the center. 1994, this was a time where ecological design or sustainable design was a rather exotic topic. Thank God that has changed. Meanwhile, it has become almost mainstream. So we have about 240 students enrolled and a bit more than 50 instructors, not all of them full-time, most of them part-time. So we have small learner groups and an intensive mentoring, which is one of the main reasons why students are studying with us. We have 4 emphases of studies. This is communication design, product design, but also the more creative parts, photography and illustration. And this is a very transparent and flexible curriculum so that students can easily set more than one focus and learn in all fields of interest without any bureaucracy. We have an 8-semester curriculum, either graduating with an Ecosign diploma or a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and additionally a vocational training with a British format, that's the BTEC Professional Diploma in Sustainable Design, a vocational training of 5 semesters. And now the interesting thing and the unique thing about Ecosign is that we have about 1/3 of all courses reserved for humanities and arts. This is quite a lot, and my presentation will hopefully explain you why we think that this is important. Now let me start with this extremely short history of design. I have identified 5 phases of it, and phase 1, the uprise of this term of design as we use it nowadays, is connected with the Industrial Revolution. The art historians amongst you know, of course, that the Italian word disegno was already important in the art of the Renaissance, but this way as we use it nowadays is really connected to the Industrial Revolution, and this is the time since we pronounce it the English and not the Italian way. So the German word for design is design. The first effects of industrialization are connected to it, and the birth came from the triangle of pre-industrial craftsmanship, of applied arts, and of engineering, which has a stronger touch, more than manufacturing, it is already a stronger touch of industry. Now the phase 2 started also already at the late 19th century, and I would call it the avant-garde phase. Here we have the functionalism and a strong movement of anti-ornamentalism developing. Two prominent names, Louis Sullivan, American architect, formulated this formula that has been so incredibly important for designers: form follows function. You may have heard it. The context, when you look at it in detail, is a bit different. It's actually more or less poetry, what he wrote there. It's not a formula. And the other guy, Adolf Loos, who wrote an article in 1908, which is called Ornament and Crime. Now, you cannot imagine what an anger, an anti-ornamental anger this man has. I will show you a little, it's a rage. I'll show you a little quote from him. First of all, Louis Sullivan, you see his surprised look looking at his text, because I manipulated it smoothly, not the words, but the line breaks. I put in some line breaks to make the poetry in it visible. So I tried to read it in a very poetic way. Excuse my English. Whether it be the sweeping eagle in his flight, or the open apple blossom, the toiling workhorse, the blithe swan, the branching oak, the winding stream at its base, the drifting clouds, over all the coursing sun, form ever follows function, and this is the law. Where function does not change, form does not change. So you see, the connection between natural and cultural patterns are very strong. Most architects, when they talk about it, and designers, they don't have an idea that this was poetry. So, a quote from Adolf Loos: "The evolution of culture marches with the elimination of ornament from useful objects." And this is one of the friendliest phases. Now this is a design from Adolf Loos, a concept for the Chicago Tribune building. As you can see, little you can see of anti-ornamentalism here. This is pure postmodernism. This is an oversized column, as you can see. Thank God it wasn't built. So. Still in the phase 2, this is the first schools that were teaching design. Still in the avant-garde, the Bauhaus as a design school from 1919 to 39. And after World War II, the Ulm School of Design from the 50s and 60s. I look at them a bit critical. I call them aesthetics for the masses. And this has two different meanings. It is designed for the social masses, connected, especially at Bauhaus, connected to some very weird utopian visions of the new man that are, in my view, very dangerous, have been very dangerous. And it is also designed for mass production, for industrial mass production. And that takes, of course, new aesthetics. Everything needs to be cheap, stackable, and mass production. So the realization of these utopias you find at IKEA would be my theory, but not everybody agrees with that. Phase 3, I would call it consumerism. Consumerism belongs to the Cold War period. It really started in the United States. And you can find a type of designers that saw themselves only as compliant auxiliaries of marketing departments in order to convince people to buy things that they don't need for money that they don't have. So their job, designing, was more or less tarting up surfaces, diluting from content, diluting from quality, just make people buy things. And this is, by the way, a very nice example for a commercial from that time. You need to pay attention to the slogan, for extra fun, take more than one. And I don't need to point out this is not the Coke in the first sense. So it's not surprising that they came up a critical reflection of design already in the 70s. There are 3 books that have been very important for this critical turn in design. Rachel Carson, indeed, with 1962, Silent Spring, was very important for the ecological movement and for designers thinking about the emissions that they are causing by their design decisions. Viktor Papanek, Austrian-American designer who wrote this book, Design for the Real World, from 1972, which really was shaking designers and changing their view completely. And Dennis Meadows with the report to the Club of Rome from 1972, Limits of Growth. So since then, designers are discussing the limits of growth and the planetary boundaries to growth and to purely linear growth models in economy. Emission and pollution on the one side, value-added change, product life cycles, and eco-design on the other side were the topics arising from the 70s on. And now, thank God, we're in phase 5, digital and academic turn. You know, people from the humanities cannot make a presentation without having some kind of turn in their presentation. So I call it digital and academic turn. The digitalization has had a very strong impact, not only of the daily work of designers, but also the 2 topics of miniaturization. Things have become much, much smaller, and they're becoming smaller all the time, which is causing the rise of interfaces. Most things don't have a proper function anymore because they're too small for our hands, so form and function have nothing to do with each other. But the interfaces become very important also in sustainable design. They're even crucial. You have let's say it like that. A good interface can make a huge difference in efficiency or energy use, for example, for heatings in private homes, up to the factor 8. That is quite a lot. So not the heating or the cost amounts, but the resources consumed for it. And the second turn is the academic turn in design, with design history, with design theory, which, with sustainable design, which has a more complex understanding than just the eco-design, which is just paying attention to the ecological side. This is, by the way, that we published at ecosign, History of Sustainable Design. It's not available in English yet, but we're working on it. And Simone Fuß, our founder, and I have been co-editors to the book. The academic turn, also, I should mention the inflation of the term design. Everything is called design nowadays. When you walk along the street, you can see some nail design studios, so they call themselves designer as well. Especially in the United States, in the educated part of the Bible Belt, you have intelligent design. Have you heard about it? So design even approaches to theology, obviously. Now, what are designers doing when they design? Of course, they transform nature into products, or to put it in other words, they transform resources into culture. What they also do is determining value-added change and product life cycles, and this impact is much stronger than you might think. According to a study of the European Commission within the eco-design framework, legislative framework, we have rules for everything in Europe. This study found out that about 80% of the ecological impact of products are determined during the design phase. This is, of course, not only the responsibility for designers, but as well. So we need competent designers. They better know what they do. Of course, communication design transforms knowledge into messages, but also design affects symbolic systems, social values, cultural patterns. To give you one strong example for cultural patterns, just look at yourself, how you deal with your smartphones, or look in the public space, how people deal with smartphones. So our cultural pattern of communication, of orientation, of many more things has strongly been impacted by this design. This would be one value-added chain, and it starts with the the design, and when we look especially at the productions, everywhere is nature that is consumed, in the raw materials, in the energy, in the infrastructure, and many more things. And a competent, which is a sustainable designer, should reflect on these things and should have the tools to analyze them before making a design decision. And I think I don't need to tell you all these things that go into production, of course also the extraction tools, but there are also ecological, political, medical, even military side effects of resource extraction. For example, let's take smartphones. This is a communication design example. This has been a campaign that you could see last year in Germany. It's Vodafone, and it's every year a new smartphone. Now, when we look at that closely, the average first phase use in 2012 for smartphones, I have only the figures from 2012, was 18 months. Now, when we look at the ecological backpack of one smartphone, and this is the average weight from 2012, this has changed. Let's look at my notes. For example, the iPhone 5, the weight is 112 grams. 6S 143 and 6S Plus 192 grams. And according to that, of course, the ecological backpack is growing. What is in the ecological backpack? All the nature, all the resources that has been moved, that has been changed. This is mainly rubble and wastewaters, highly toxic wastewaters, minus the weight of the object that you're calculating. So when you take this 140 grams, for example, there are almost 30 kilos of resources for the production and about 6 kilos for the transports. Now let's think what happens when you apply higher mipsology. MIPS means material input per service unit. And when we define a month as of use as a service unit, we have 18 months. That would be almost 2 kilos per month. And when we reduce the use phase to 12 months, it would be almost 3 kilos. That is a huge difference. That makes about 2 million tons of natural resources. That is, in Germany we have the average of per capita and year of 40 tons of resources that we use, every person, every year. That is, when you look at these 2 million tons, that would be 2 billion tons, I'm sorry, that would be about 50,000 people more using. That's quite something from this stupid campaign. And this is only one aspect of them. So sustainable designers would never support such a campaign. What do we have in these smartphones? There are some really precious things inside, and especially those with very, very low percentages are very problematic because it's extremely difficult to get them out there again in recycling processes. I just read an article that there are some attempts now for gallium to filter it out again, but tantalum or coltan, for example, is almost impossible. So that is just wasted. And this is where you get the tantalum, for example, from. This is a tantalum mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo, financing a civil war for now 20 years. Or a copper mining in Papua New Guinea with a very high density of different original cultures that are just intoxicated from the wastewaters from this copper mining that we need in our phones. And just that you have an imagination of the size of it, that's a truck. A huge truck. So, what can sustainable design do in order to protect these precious resources? First of all, they need, sustainable designers need to incorporate value-added chains into their design decisions. They need to know what they do. Some examples in design, they need to prolong the use phase of products. We just saw this material input per service units. These are criteria of longevity, of repairability, of modularity, so that you can use the things longer and make much more use of these precious resources. You could also incorporate the reuse and recycling in design processes so that you don't have only a product system but a product service system that recycles them also in business models. Transforming products into services, of course, interfaces that help saving resources I mentioned already, and of course you can also foster the change of customer habits by having more attractive social practices. This is, for example, sharing models. They also have their rebound risks as everything, but these are also important models. Now, there are, of course, some obstacles to sustainable design. The biggest one, these sustainable interrelations are very complex, and people don't want to hear about complex things. They want easy answers. This is a very big obstacle. So, another big obstacle, facts don't change habits. If you know something, you don't change. I don't know if there are smokers amongst you. You all know how unhealthy it is. Do you stop smoking? No. Many more things. We all know the so-called inconvenient truths about climate change. Do we change our habits? No. We know about it, but we don't change. And this is a huge obstacle. Only or merely technological approaches don't produce acceptance because they create a certain alienation. So you need something additional that gets into the everyday life practices of people. Moralization is very popular in Germany. It produces mainly reluctance. And the call for abstinence causes the opposite, and this is aversion. We have some very famous political examples for that. The Green Party wanted to introduce a veggie day in all public restaurants and canteens and so forth, and it was a big scandal because people don't like it when you interfere with their nutrition. And for designers, the biggest topic, users just don't do with the things what you want them to do. And this is a famous example. So the user experience research is crucial for having design that can really be implemented in everyday life and find acceptance. This is also an important part of sustainable design. So this is my definition of sustainable design, what it needs to do. It has to be able to handle the complexities that designers are facing today and in the future even more. And this is my claim. Implementation of sustainable design depends on a deep cultural comprehension. And why is that? When designers design an object, deliberately, unwittingly, they choose a material, they choose a form, they choose a function. This is basics. But they do this according to their normative values, to the cultural patterns they're carrying around with themselves or, without noticing them, with concepts of world, with knowledge, and especially with voids of knowledge. And these are much more dangerous than the knowledge, of course. And design does shape us, our imaginations, our perceptions, our concepts of the world. It designs us as we design it. So we design ourselves by designing things. Again, this huge cultural disruption by smartphones. We don't know yet what that means. It's a big, big change. Just as a little example. So design is not only shaped by designers, but also by the users and by what they do, by their narrations, by the symbolic system. So it's rather helpful to know these symbolic systems in order to change something. So cultural literacy, that is what's necessary, and when you don't have it, things like this can happen. For those who don't speak German, the advertisement says fixing technology. So either it's a great sense of humor or it's cultural illiteracy. So now comes, this is my favorite phrase. Natural resources diminish through use. These are the planetary boundaries. But cultural resources grow through use. This is why it's so much fun to use them. And this is my job mainly at ecosign. Now a word on culture, arts and aesthetics. I told you there is a design overstretch. Designers are overburdened with expectations, what they're supposed to solve in problems and so forth. And almost everything is called design, almost every problem solving is expected from designers, and this is still growing and changing very much. Why is that? Has been there a precedent for that? Yes, it has. From Plato till about 1750, there was a very stable and boring discourse on aesthetics. Mimesis, imitation, from Plato on till almost 19th century. When it was a bit more sophisticated, like Horace, it was aut prodesse, aut delectare, so art shall be useful and entertain, and if it's really, really complex, it's a matter of taste, and how can you develop taste? So these were the debates in more than 2,000 years. Then suddenly, towards 1800, this is like an axis, this year 1800, you have, this is now a bit educated German name dropping, you have suddenly an explosion of aesthetic courses with Winkelmann, Sulzer, Moritz, especially Immanuel Kant, which is a very important thing, but with Winkelmann and the perception of the Greek arts. This is thoughts on the imitation of Greek works. Suddenly there is an explosion of very sophisticated thinking, talking and writing about arts. And this continues, more name dropping, especially, well, all of them. Suddenly the art has a very high responsibility. It is supposed to avoid revolutions. Schiller, for example, through aesthetic education. Or let's take, who else? Let's take Hegel. Art is suddenly on the same level as philosophy and religion. It's not a craftsmanship anymore. Suddenly it is on the same refractive level as philosophy, as religion. Or a really funny guy, Wackenroder, he wrote a very interesting book, at least the title was very interesting. In German it's Herzensergießungen eines kunstliebenden Klosterbruders. In now my notes, in English it is Outpourings of an art-loving friar. It's very gloomy, but important because he is replacing the aesthetic experience, no, he is replacing the religious experience with aesthetic experience. And this is something that has been going on since then, that religion is turned into art. So what we can observe, for about 250 years, an expansion of art in terms of means, of materials, of content, of topic, especially in the confidence of its own agency. Artists are extremely self-confident, and exactly the same thing you can see now for design. This is Josef von Eichendorff, one of our romanticists, and Romanticism is a flagship of this high perception of art. This is a beautiful translation, by the way. Songs repose in things abounding that keep dreaming to be heard, and the world shall start resounding if you hit her magic word. So, redemption from the burdens of industrialization, of enlightenment, can be done by poetry in special or arts in general. And this is something that designers do nowadays. I just did a little Google search, image search on design, safe world, and these are some outcomes, but also the opposite. Not everybody agrees with it. Sorry. So, Bildung, education for sustainable design. What does sustainable design need? It needs the ability to navigate in these complex, in these wicked contexts or problems, and in this very complicated interdependency. So some young sustainable designers are sometimes very frustrated when they see, oh my God, I can't use this material because this will happen somewhere in the world. But the other one, what can I do? Shall I stop designing things at all? Well, there is no perfect decision. Even if you decide to lie down and die, it will cost resources because somebody needs to pick you up with a car and so forth. So there is no zero solution, but there are always better and worse solutions, and sustainable designers need to find the best solutions, the best practices that are available. So that takes a comprehensive and especially reliable research. Many things are called sustainable design that have nothing to do with sustainability. On the contrary, they feel like it, but the feeling isn't enough. The cultural and symbolic literacy, I think I made it clear why this is so important, because this is the last, in German we say, last meter connecting the network and the end user. And this connection can only be cultural way. You can have big industrial technical solutions, but somewhere you need the interface that people like to use. Narration ability. To convince people, you cannot give them a moral lecture. You need to somehow tell them a story. Stories are credible. Even if you know that they're a fiction, they still create credibility. This is also important to understand the own traditions and reflecting them. When we look at social context, at the refugee question, understanding our own traditions would make it much easier to tolerate other traditions. A conservative critic of conservative critics of immigration said, before you want to save the Christian Occident, why don't you get baptized first? That was an interesting point. Developing a valid faculty of judgment, this is something that you can learn also in philosophy, and you can imagine when a young designer goes to a prospective employer and just can handle some computer software. The next update will make him illiterate. But when he has a certain faculty of judgment, he can do much more than bounce some pixels on the screen back and forth. And this is what we want to give to young people. And of course, the space and time for developing their own creative personality. And this personal thing is also crucial. And this is one example how we do it. I apologize for a third poem. This is by Goethe. And this makes the connection to my first slide with the Nebra sky disk, which had already this cosmic image. This is a short poem by Goethe, our favorite saint, cultural saint in German. Above all summits is calm. In all the treetops you feel scarcely a breath. The birds in the forest are silent. Just wait, soon you will rest as well. The translation is not very elegant, but I think you get the point. What you have here is a cosmic image of the inorganic nature, the summits, the organic nature, the plants, you have the animals with the birds, and then you have the human being that is addressed as you. And here we have a huge harmony of nature. It is one closed cosmos. This is actually very close to the original slide that I was showing you with this Nebra sky disk. Another point of reflection, this is a painting by Caspar David Friedrich, Romanticist painter. This is called the Ice Sea Expedition, and you can tell that it obviously didn't work. So this is the early 19th century, and this is a meditation on human effort to manipulate nature and nature's reaction. This is ice, but we still can learn a lot from it. And before I show you one or two examples of works, I think it would be time for your questions first. So thank you very much for your attention.